CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Global Business Europe, live from CGTN in London. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. Iran goes to the polls in a controversial election, all but guaranteed to deliver a hardline president.
Our other headlines: Germany's government wants to offload its stake in Lufthansa. The CEO says he'll pay back an $11 billion bailout by September.
UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson's Conservative Party suffers an embarrassing mid-term by-election loss. Has he lost his winning touch?
And the Tartan Army comes to town for football's oldest international fixture.
Each vote counts. Come and choose your president. That was the message from Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who called for a high turnout in the country's presidential election. But with a limited choice of candidates between 3 hardliners and 1 moderate, there are questions about how many citizens will really come out to vote. Well, let's talk now to Ehsan Kavani, a reporter based in Tehran. Ehsan, the winner will replace the outgoing, relatively moderate Hassan Rouhani, who served the maximum 2 terms. What's the real choice before the Iranian people at this election?
The official results will be announced by early hours of Saturday. However, most of the polls suggest that the front runner is Ebrahim Raisi, the current Chief Justice. Meanwhile, there are some unofficial reports and polls saying Abdel Nasser Hemmati, the former governor of the central bank, could deduct enough votes from Raisi and the election could go to the second round. After seeing presidents from different political spectrums, including reformist Khatami, hardliner Ahmadinejad, and moderate Rouhani, what the majority of Iranian people want to see is an administration which improves the country's economy and raise living standards. Many people believe corruption is the main obstacle in the way of progress and economic prosperity. Let's not forget that one of Raisi's main electoral slogans is to systematically fight corruption, since there has been corruption among administration officials during the past 2 decades. And Raisi is expected to take care of such popular concern. A huge amount of potentials have been wasted in the country's political arena during the past years in the form of political disputes between conservatives and the non-conservative administration. I think Raisi will be, in fact, more aligned with the country's main sources of power, and he could tackle corruption and enhance the country's economic situation in a calmer political atmosphere.
Ebrahim Raisi is the front runner. I wonder, will his victory, if it happens, change already strained relationships with Western countries? If you go back to the 1980s, he's been widely criticized for his role in mass executions of political prisoners, hasn't he?
You know, the relations of Iran with the entire world follows the fundamental principles of the Islamic Republic of Iran and Islamic Revolution, I mean, and it is based on mutual respect and national interests of Iran, naturally. For example, in nuclear issue and the JCPOA revival talks, it really doesn't matter who becomes the next president in Iran, whether a hardliner or a moderate president. The country's red lines and positions have been numerously told to the European countries and Washington. The composition of Iranian negotiating team will change in the new administration. but the same position will exist. Raisi, who is the front runner in majority of the polls, says he would pursue the supreme leader's position, and that is Washington must fulfill its commitments and remove all the sanctions, and Iran will then verify such a move. He says Washington's unilateral withdrawal from the 2015 deal has damaged trust, and therefore enough executable guarantees must be given by the Western countries.
Hassan Kavani in Tehran. We shall no doubt talk to you in the coming hours when we get some results, but for the moment, thank you very much.
The boss of Lufthansa says the airline will try to pay back all $11 billion of state aid it received during the pandemic before September. Carsten Spohr was speaking at an aviation conference along with Chancellor Angela Merkel. Germany's transport minister has also said Berlin wants to end its stake in the carrier as soon as possible. Let's talk now to our correspondent Ryan Thompson, who is in Frankfurt. So, Ryan, do you think that Lufthansa can pay back this $11 billion in such a short time?
Well, Robin, it will be tough, definitely. But in German business, a promise is a promise. And in recent quarters, we've seen Lufthansa manage to put its cash losses down significantly as it's thinned down its operation through layoffs and cutting its flight schedule. But in the next few weeks, we're expecting the airline to add flights, see European travel pick up as people head on holiday, and not to mention just the news today that Germany and much of Europe will reopen to the United States, and that will really open up those very, very profitable transatlantic routes. So Lufthansa is clearly hoping for a Q3 rebound here, which enough cash, which hopefully will allow them to pay down most of this loan, if not all of it, and that's what they're putting their mouth to.
So, Ryan, clearly the German government and Lufthansa are keen to get people flying again, but how are they planning to do it?
Yeah, they're using some pretty innovative tools, some interesting technology to really allow people to get up in the air safely again. I don't know how much flying you've done, Robin, during this pandemic. I've had the chance to fly a little bit for work, and it can be quite a hassle, and it will continue to be quite a hassle with verifying vaccination status, verifying test strategies. The point of this and what Lufthansa is hoping to roll out is a digital portal that will allow people ahead of time to roll out their vaccination, to upload their vaccination certificate or put their test result online, and that will be able to be digitally verified. They'll get a QR code, and they'll be able to easily roll up to the gate with avoiding those very, very long queues that have been forming during the pandemic as these check-in agents have been forced to verify all these documents and hopefully return flying to what's more of a streamlined process. There is one caveat here, though. They are saying that people should still carry those documents, whether it be a vaccination certificate or a test result, on themselves as they travel.
And also on Angela Merkel's agenda today is a meeting with French President Emmanuel Macron, who's in Germany today for face-to-face talks. What will they be discussing?
Yeah, you know, it's funny, Robin. Since the start of the pandemic, these two leaders have crossed paths, but it's always been abroad, whether it's been in Cornwall or Brussels. Neither of them have been hosted to their home country. They are hoping to discuss some pretty key European policy issues ahead of next week's European Council summit in Brussels. There's a lot on the agenda, including the COVID-19 pandemic, the economic recovery from that, resurgence in migration issues, and a common policy on Turkey and Russia aggression. They will be doing it over a nice long dinner. We don't know exactly what is on the menu, but it's interesting here. If you remember, it was just last week that these two leaders spent the weekend together at the G7 summit in Cornwall alongside U.S. President Joe Biden and the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. In the week since that has happened, a lot has happened, and so there is a lot for them to discuss.
Ryan Thompson in Frankfurt, thanks very much.
British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has suffered a surprise defeat. His ruling Conservative Party lost a mid-term parliamentary by-election to Britain's third political party, the Liberal Democrats. Voters in the English constituency have elected a Conservative MP at every election for nearly 5 decades. Russell Foster is a lecturer in British and European politics at King's College in London. I asked him what went wrong for the Prime Minister's party.
This has been a combination of a local issue and a national issue. So the local issue specific to this by-election was the construction of a new rail line, and the Conservatives have got a lot of criticism for this throughout the country. But also it is indicative of a broader national trend that people are becoming tired of the Conservative Party. Remember that Britain has been under Conservative governments for 11 years now, and this is particularly bad for Boris Johnson, because in the December 2019 general election, Boris Johnson was not elected because people like him. He was elected because people didn't want the alternative. So this is a sign in an era of falling popularity for the Prime Minister, of falling popularity for the incumbent 11-year government. It's a sign that people are getting tired of the Conservatives.
And is there a message beyond the UK here? I wonder more broadly, beyond Britain, does this election result send out any message to incumbent governments presiding over varying performances handling the coronavirus pandemic?
This by-election is a sign of something that we're going to see around the world as we leave the worst stages of the pandemic and start to enter the post-pandemic world. About a year ago, governments around the world, including Boris Johnson, incumbent governments experienced what we call the rally round the flag effect. In a crisis, when people are frightened, nervous, they support the sitting incumbent government. And we saw popularity for incumbent governments rising spectacularly as lockdowns began. But now that we're leaving the pandemic behind us, and of course Britain has a very high vaccination rate, people are weary of the way that those incumbent governments have handled the pandemic. They want a change, and so incumbent leaders, prime ministers, presidents and parties are facing rising challenges from populations who want a way out of the pandemic, a way out of the economic consequences, and simply a change to business as usual.
It is worth pointing out, isn't it, that the swing away from the ruling Conservative Party did not benefit the UK centre-left opposition party, the Labour Party. Is this also a bad day for the Labour Party and other centre-left parties?
This is even worse for the Labour Party than it is for the Conservative Party. In the 2017 general election, in that constituency, the Labour Party got around 17,000 votes. Yesterday, they got 600. The Labour Party in the United Kingdom is in terminal decline, and it's probably never going to return as a party of government. But that's not unique to Britain. We have been seeing this since the beginning of the global financial crisis across Europe, across the West, and across the world more broadly. People are getting very weary of traditional centre-left democratic socialist parties, and they are either swinging to the right in the form of conservative parties or right-wing populists, or swinging far to the left, or supporting Green parties. So the by-election was a bad day for the Conservatives. It was a catastrophe for Labour.
It's been a big week for international relations, with the NATO summit and the meeting between Presidents Biden and Putin. But it all began with the first face-to-face G7 leaders summit since the outbreak of the pandemic.
CGTN's Stephen Cole looks at what we've learned about international cooperation from these gatherings. And as Dr. Tristan Naylor from the London School of Economics tells him, especially the West's relationship with China.
I think they all identify China as the major power not in the room. And I think they're all unified in identifying just how complex each of their respective relationships are with China. On some issues, it's about cooperation, such as climate change. On others, it's about competition, such as economic growth. And on others, it's very much about contestation, such as on human rights. And I think where there is divergence amongst the seven, it's in sort of the weighting of these dimensions of very complicated relationships. But overall, all the G7 leaders see China as the predominant power that must be dealt with on pretty much every global issue that that the world, and indeed the G7 playing a role in it, needs to face.
And you can see more of that interview on the agenda with Stephen Cole this weekend here on CGTN.
China's state planner and market regulator have launched a joint investigation into coal prices, cracking down on speculation and illicit hoarding. Thermal coal's been hovering around a record $140 per tonne since May. At least 3 leading coal pricing indices have suspended publication of daily assessments in a bid to stabilise prices.
UK food and drink exports to Europe fell nearly $2.8 billion in the first quarter of 2021. Sales of dairy products fared particularly badly, falling 90%. Analysts say the COVID pandemic, Brexit checks and stockpiling all played a part. But some UK food producers say the data now shows long-term structural problems caused by the UK's departure from the EU.
The Bank of Japan says it will launch a plan to boost funding to fight climate change by the end of the year. The move highlights how the issue is now crucial for central banks. The bank's governor says climate change and responses to it stand to have an extremely large impact on the economy.
The UK supermarket giant Tesco has reported 0.5% growth in year-on-year sales for its March to May quarter. The company called it a strong performance because the previous year benefited from people eating at home and buying more groceries during lockdown. Tesco said sales would fall by a few percentage points for the rest of this year as the economy continued to open up.
A hawkish shift from the Federal Reserve has given the dollar a boost, sending the currency to its highest level in months. That's after central bank officials signalled sooner than expected interest rate rises. Well, let's talk about this with our correspondent John Terrett at the New York Stock Exchange. Hello to you, John. So it seems like the dollar's woken up.
Hey, Robin. The dollar's woken up. That's a great way of putting it. Hey, Jamie. Hey, Robin. You know, it's funny because this whole thing about the dollar going up is very, very contentious in the United States, here on Wall Street and certainly in Washington, D.C. Generally speaking, presidents are not encouraged by their handlers to speak up the dollar. And, of course, there is one very famous president recently who did just that. You can guess who it was. It was Donald Trump. And he's going, yeah, America is back. We love our dollar. We want our dollar to be strong. And it was really funny because an aide sort of tapped him on the shoulder and said, Mr. President, actually, we don't want a strong dollar. And Trump's going, what do you mean you don't? Well, of course you want a strong dollar. And the aide had to say, well, no, we don't, because if we have a strong dollar, it means our friends overseas can't afford to buy as much of our exports as we would like them to. And it means that people here can buy more of their stuff and bring it back over here. We don't really want that. So Trump's going, OK, moving on, moving on. So now they have a strong dollar, or at least a stronger dollar. I think it's up about 0.6% compared to how it was on Wednesday. And as you rightly say, it's all to do with the Federal Reserve changing its tone on inflation. Let me remind you about what they said. They first of all said that inflation is likely to go on rising for about 3 months, but then they think it will taper off. They also said that inflation could turn out to be higher and more persistent than we expect, which basically means they have no more idea than I do what's happening with inflation. But they also, and here's the key now, they also said that in the second half of 2023, they thought they would begin raising interest rates, which is one of the key ways of calming down inflation. There are others, but this is the key way that they do it. And that's a whole year earlier than anybody had thought and that they had previously signaled. So now the dollar is more attractive to buy. Previous to this, the dollar had rather been parked by the currency exchanges in the basement while they dealt with other currencies around the world where they feel they could make more money. And now the dollar is back. And one of the big effects of that is on the commodities markets, both for commodities and those companies that either manage or produce or distribute commodities. So things like soybeans and wheat and sugar and copper and corn and lumber are all down in the last couple of days, partly because of the Federal Reserve's announcement regarding interest rates and inflation, but also because China has made some moves. It's opening up its reserves in order to calm down the cost of commodities. So it looks as if commodity inflation, which we have seen in the best part of the last year or so, is now coming to an end. Robin?
So, John, commodities moving then, but which other stocks have been affected by this?
Well, the thing is, we've kind of got used to an almost daily rotation here now regarding where the money is actually going. Sometimes it goes into value stocks and sometimes into growth stocks. And a value stock would, in my opinion, others may disagree, be things like Disney and Boeing and 3M. And then you've got the growth stocks, of course, those names like Tesla and Apple and Facebook. But we've got the commodities sharply lower today, all the companies that deal with them. US Steel would be an example, BHP Group, Rio Tinto, Southern Copper, Suncoke Energy. They've either all been down or they are down at the moment. The banks are down sharply as well. They're leading the way down today. which is slightly surprising given the fact we now know that interest rates are heading up in 2023. But anyway, part of it is that Citigroup gave a profits warning on Wednesday. Their shares were down about 4% there. They reckon their revenue is going to be down about 30% in the course of the next year or so. So much depends. In fact, it all depends on where this inflation is going. Is it transitory or is it going to be transitional? Now, the markets are busy here today, finally, in the last 10 seconds, because this is a brand new public holiday. It's called Juneteenth. President Biden signed it into law yesterday. A bit too early for many government departments and for certainly the stock exchange to acknowledge this holiday today, but they probably will next year. In the meantime, busy because it's what they call a quadruple witching day here, which is when options contracts need to be renegotiated. It happens 4 times a year. It's always a bit of a mess. The Dow's down more than 1%, the Nasdaq almost 1%, and the S&P 500 has all 11 sectors in the red as of this hour. Robin and Jamie?
John, great to talk to you. John Terrett there in New York.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, the pandemic restricted travel around the world. So why were a record number of refugees on the move?
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to The Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Covering the world from 4 continents. A new horizon. Teams in Beijing, Washington, D.C., Nairobi, and London. Who connect, interact, and inquire to bring you the stories that matter to all. The Link, only on CGTN. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic. For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal. As we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. Quick reminder, CGTN is available to watch for free on all of the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Daily Motion, as well as CGTN.com and the CGTN app. The Spanish Coast Guard is searching the sea off the Canary Islands for 6 missing migrants after their dinghy capsized while trying to cross into Europe. 2 people have drowned, while 38 were rescued, including a pregnant woman and several children. Residents from the port town of Azola reported hearing people screaming from the sea. The number of people embarking on this journey from Africa to the Canary Islands has increased by 116% compared to last year.
The United Nations High Commission for Refugees says the number of people forced to flee wars, violence, persecution and human rights violations has risen to a record 82 million. That's despite the pandemic restricting movement worldwide as countries shut borders and ordered lockdowns. According to the UNHCR's Global Trends report, more than half of the total number of displaced people, about 48 million, are displaced internally because they're unable to easily cross international borders to escape harm. More than two-thirds of all displaced refugees, or 68%, came from just 5 countries. Those are Syria, Venezuela, Afghanistan, South Sudan and Myanmar. The report also shows that girls and boys under the age of 18 account for 42% of all forcibly displaced people, and many of them may remain refugees for years. Matthew Saltmarsh is from the UNHCR. I asked him the impact the coronavirus pandemic has had on refugees.
It's been another bleak year for people who have been forced to flee through no fault of their own. The numbers are up again. The total population that is now displaced, that's internal and across borders, is the equivalent of the size of the population of Germany. And that number's been rising for 9 straight years now. The reasons, of course, are many, but topmost, of course, is conflict. We're looking at long-standing conflicts like Afghanistan, Syria, Somalia, but also more recent conflicts, for example, in the Sahel, in Africa, and places like Ethiopia as well, and northern Mozambique. And then, of course, you've got climate, which intersects with all of that. And in many cases, in a number of countries, this has caused significant internal displacement as well. But you mentioned COVID. I mean, COVID has been a factor in closing many borders and in stopping movement. So it hasn't actually added to the level of displacement. But COVID has, of course, been had a very detrimental impact on refugees. The socio-economic impact has been really marked. We've seen that across the world in a number of displacement situations.
When you look at the makeup of global refugees, over 3/5 come from just 5 countries. What are the main issues they're escaping from?
Well, in those 5 countries, it really is about conflict, instability, insecurity, and in some cases, economic issues. For example, Venezuela, the situation there has been incredibly unstable in recent years, and now there's over 5 million refugees and migrants who have spilled out of Venezuela into neighboring countries. If you look at a situation like Syria, that's, of course, the largest displacement situation in the world. Something like 13.5 million people are displaced from Syria at the moment. And although the conflict isn't as intense as it was 3-4 years ago, there is still fighting and there is still instability. And then, of course, climate. In an area like the Sahel, where internal displacement has actually crossed the 2 million mark this year, there's a combination of all of those different factors.
So we're seeing a lot of refugees from just 5 countries, a lot of young people who are refugees too. Your report suggests 1 million children were born as refugees between 2018 and 2020. What kind of effect will this potentially have on that generation?
Well, absolutely devastating. I mean, close to half of the global displaced are children. It varies, but this last year, it was about 42%. And of course, the longer these conflicts go on, the more children are born into displacement and have their youth in displacement. And the effects on their future is, as I said, absolutely devastating. Around half of them are out of school as a result of COVID. The levels of refugee children who are able to go on to secondary and higher education is extremely low, a tiny, tiny figure. And so, you know, the effect on their ability to rebuild their lives and to set themselves up independently is incredibly marked.
Armed attackers have killed a policeman and abducted at least 80 students and 5 teachers in Nigeria. The raid happened at a school in the northwest of the country in the remote town of Birnin Yori in Kebbi State. It's the 3rd mass kidnapping in as many weeks. Well, let's talk to the reporter Tessim Okende in Jos in Nigeria. Tessim, what do we know about this latest attack?
Well, the latest is that 5 of the abducted students have been rescued by military personnel. That happened hours ago, as was disclosed to journalists who asked very poking questions. Sadly, one of the students died as military personnel had a crossfire with the abductors. That's the latest. We can also tell you that part of the people who were kidnapped were made up of boys and girls. There's widespread, information that those who were actually kidnapped were just girls. Police authorities in the state have come out to say that, look, among those who were kidnapped as well are boys. So that's the latest.
I think it's more than 800 students have been kidnapped since December, with the authorities there saying that those people behind these raids are after ransom money. What is the government and the security forces doing to try to stop these frequent attacks?
Well, the government has, the president, to start with, was in the country's northeastern state of Borno yesterday, which has been the hottest bed for insurgency in the country. And he was very, very emphatic. He gave marching orders to the military, the police and other security agencies to ensure they deal squarely with security concerns in the country. That is one part. I can also tell you that military personnel are on the search and rescue mission to rescue the abducted students. Like I told you earlier, 5 of the students have been rescued already. The search and rescue operation is ongoing, as was disclosed hours ago by Air Force authorities. This is what is going on at the moment. The bandits, it's more of a business for the bandits now, not just in Kebbi State where they abducted students, but other states such as Kaduna, Katsina, and other states in Nigeria as well. But to answer you very frankly, the military is ongoing, is on a search and rescue operations, and the president just yesterday gave marching orders for enemies of peace in the country to be dealt with squarely.
Tessa McKende in Nigeria, thank you very much.
Namibia's genocide victims say they want a landmark deal with Germany revisited, just weeks after Berlin and Windhoek signed off on a $1 billion agreement to help make amends for colonial-era crimes.
Germany's public apology comes as the country is facing increasing pressure at home to confront its colonial past. From Berlin, Trent Murray reports.
It was a very public admission of guilt, 100 years in the making.
We officially refer to these events in Namibia as what they were, a genocide.
With a very public acknowledgement of its colonial-era crimes, the German government joins other European powers that have, in recent years, attempted to confront their role in Africa's colonial past. And while Berlin's apology and subsequent offer of €1 billion in development aid to Namibia has been welcomed, there has also been criticism, with some activists saying the process has been more about politics than offering help to the country in the modern age.
And you cannot leave out the descendants of the victims of the genocide. So we are not surprised by the results now or by the atmosphere in Namibia, which is heated, I would say, as many protest against what the government has negotiated with Germany.
The apology follows a long period of negotiation between politicians in Berlin and Windhoek, a process that has helped unearth more information about what happened between 1884 to 1915, when Germany ruled large swathes of southwest Africa. There is some hope that the acknowledgement of genocide in Namibia could have a long-term impact here in Germany, with some experts saying it could well be a moment for many more Germans, including school children, to learn about their country's colonial past in Africa.
Tremendous pressure was put on the politicians because Germans, I think most Germans just assumed that Germany would not keep to stolen artifacts, just restituted. That Germany were good at recognizing past sins and would not deny the genocide. And they learned suddenly that the political rhetoric, that there is a huge gap between the political rhetoric and the political practice.
While the wounds of the past may never fully heal, ongoing dialogue around the delicate issues of the past is seen as critical to helping chart a path forward. A path that sees Africa and Europe stand side by side in the spirit of friendship and reconciliation. Trent Murray, CGTN, Berlin.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. Severe COVID cases and deaths may be dropping across France, but nursing staff are still feeling the impact of the pandemic.
The EU's digital COVID certificate, which offers the promise of unlocking hassle-free travel around Europe this summer.
In less than 2 weeks' time, the Czech border will also open to all EU and Serbian citizens. 4.4 million Hungarians received their first dose of COVID vaccine.
18 and over can receive a COVID-19 vaccination, but it does come with conditions.
Third wave will probably take longer to emerge because of the high vaccination levels. The home of English rugby, Twickenham Football Stadium, is being turned into a mass vaccination centre.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
We can try out the wild and crazy ideas. Nothing can stop an idea whose time is coming. This idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very basic when we're trying to save the world.
Awesome!
We hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
Well, welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. Iran goes to the polls in a controversial election, all but guaranteed to deliver a hardline president.
Germany's government wants to offload its stake in Lufthansa. The CEO says he'll pay back an $11 billion bailout by September.
And UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson's ruling Conservative Party suffers an embarrassing mid-term parliamentary by-election loss.
British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has said he's very confident that he'll be able to lift remaining coronavirus restrictions in England on his new target date of July the 19th. But a sharp rise in the Delta variant is causing growing concern. Nicole Johnston reports.
Despite the speedy rollout of COVID-19 vaccinations across the UK, new infections are still growing. The latest figures from Public Health England show that new infections of the Delta variant, first identified in India, have increased 78% in the last week. The number of people with COVID-19 in hospital has almost doubled. They're mostly people who haven't been vaccinated or only partly vaccinated. And a number of senior scientific advisors in the UK now believe the country is at the start of a third wave of infections. The difference this time is that 4 out of 5 people have been vaccinated. So the link between COVID and ending up in hospital severely ill has been broken. And from Friday, anyone aged over 18 in England will be able to book a vaccine. And British Prime Minister Boris Johnson says that he's confident that in July, England will be able to fully reopen its economy and society.
I'm very confident that we'll be able to go through with step 4 of the roadmap on the timetable that I've set out, with treating July the 19th, as I've said, as a terminus date. I think that's certainly what the data continues to indicate.
The Delta variant is now responsible for more than 90% of new infections across the UK. And England delayed its reopening by a month so that it could assess the data and find out whether hospitals become overwhelmed with new infections. Nicole Johnston, CGTN, London.
While the number of severe cases and deaths from COVID continue to fall across France, the impact of the pandemic on nursing staff goes on. CGTN correspondent Ross Cullen reports now from a Paris hospital where staff have dealt with 3 separate surges of the infection.
As France's third wave of COVID-19 cases recedes, patients who were admitted for coronavirus treatment continue to recover. But one longer-lasting effect is the mental impact on nursing staff, having to deal with 1.5 years of this pandemic in France and 3 separate surges of infections.
I'm a relatively new nurse, and I was still in training when the pandemic began. It was pretty tough here, just as it was in every hospital. Psychologically, there was a lot going on. We had to look after patients, their families, and it was mentally tough to deal with the deaths as well.
To try to ease the pressure on hospitals, France closed the culture and hospitality sectors in October last year and then went into a lockdown light in March this year.
For this hospital, the third wave of COVID-19 infections in the spring was more intense than the second surge in cases in the winter, but it did not last as long.
More than 110,000 people have lost their lives to the disease in France, and the pandemic stretched hospitals to the limit, but some medical facilities were overwhelmed.
We had new patients with serious problems. Like the first wave, we had patients in wards like this having to move to intensive care frequently, where there was a regular lack of beds. We had totally different age groups coming in, like the very young and also the elderly, who, for some reason, had not been vaccinated yet.
This time last year, after the first wave, France's summer holidays went ahead as normal, but the mass movement and mixing of people sparked a long second wave. This time around, the hope is that the millions of vaccine doses already administered will help to control any possible surge later this year. Ross Cullen, CGTN, Gonesse Hospital, Paris.
The World Health Organization is awaiting an independent review of Italian research indicating that COVID-19 could have been in circulation as early as September 2019. The findings will form part of its investigations into the origins of the outbreak. Hermione Kitson reports.
This Siena laboratory could play a crucial role in determining the chronology of COVID-19.
This opened a door in the research for early circulation of the new coronaviruses.
In collaboration with the Milan Cancer Institute, researchers tested 1,000 blood samples from healthy volunteers in a lung cancer screening trial.
What we found is unexpected because we found some antibodies in a serum sample from 2019, in particular starting from September, October 2019.
Most positive samples were from the region of Lombardy, Italy's first lockdown region, but researchers say the results question when the virus first emerged rather than where.
We do not say that the Wuhan strain was already circulating in Italy, but what we found is the antibodies. So what we can say is that maybe a similar virus was already circulating in Italy before.
The WHO requested the results be retested by an independent laboratory in the Netherlands. Their report is due by the end of the year. It's part of a body of evidence that COVID-19 was in circulation months before Italy's first clinical case in February 2020.
And what happened after our research? Several research groups started to search for the virus, not only for the antibodies.
There are 2 notable studies by Milan University, one which diagnosed a 25-year-old woman retrospectively after her skin biopsy of November 10, 2019 was retested, and another which diagnosed a 4-year-old boy after his throat swab, also of November 2019, was re-examined, while environmental research, such as wastewater sampling, found traces of the virus in December 2019.
I believe that the WHO delegates, if they merge everything, probably we will have a more clear picture of the origin.
As investigations continue into the start of Italy's COVID crisis, its recovery continues. There's been a steep decline in both the infection rate and the daily death toll, allowing restrictions across the country to be eased. Scientists say there are many pieces of the puzzle yet to be found. In the meantime, tourists are once again filling the country's famous piazzas. Hermione Kitson, CGTN, Siena.
The World Health Organization has warned of a rapid rise in coronavirus cases and deaths across Africa. The Director General says he expects the situation will get worse, with a huge number of countries being forced to stop administering second doses of vaccines because of shortage of supplies. He says there's been a 52% increase in cases and a 32% rise in deaths over the last week.
Europe has lost a legal bid to force AstraZeneca to deliver millions more doses of its COVID-19 vaccines by the end of June. AstraZeneca was originally expected to supply up to 300 million doses to the EU in the first 6 months of this year, but production problems cut that to 100 million. The EU has launched a second lawsuit against the drug maker, seeking compensation for delays.
Hong Kong police have charged the chief editor and chief executive of the pro-democracy tabloid Apple Daily with collusion with a foreign country. This comes after the police raided the newspaper's offices. 3 other executives have been released after all 5 were held under the new national security law.
Northern Ireland's Democratic Unionist Party is looking for a new leader after Edwin Poots resigned just 3 weeks into the job. The news came hours after the UK government said it would push laws through Parliament giving more support to the Irish language. The DUP opposes the policy, but it's an important policy for the political party Sinn Féin for it to continue power sharing.
Israel says it carried out airstrikes in Gaza after Palestinians launched more incendiary balloons from the territory. It's the second round of strikes in 3 nights after multiple attacks using devices carried by the balloons. The violence challenges the fragile ceasefire, which has been in place since the 21st of May. There were no reports of casualties.
CGTN.com has all the week's top stories from China. Here is a quick look. More on all of those stories at europe.cgtn.com.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, the oldest of enemies prepare to face off at Wembley as the Tartan Army arrives in London for England v Scotland at Euro 2020.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you. All around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London. China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Mari, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. When the pandemic hit, many musicians were forced to pack up their instruments. For an industry that needs both an audience and close collaboration to survive, this was particularly hard.
One American orchestra in Minnesota joined forces with scientists to find out how to make the playing of wind instruments in a group safer by studying fluid dynamics. Shini Samara from CGTN's science show Razor reports.
When the pandemic hit, many musicians were forced to take their work home. For an industry that needs both an audience and close collaboration, this was particularly hard.
So when Melly Willis from the Minnesota Orchestra decided to find a safe way to bring her musicians back onto stage, she called upon the study of fluid dynamics for some answers.
Here we are, a symphony orchestra, and we have, by nature, lots of people on stage together making music, and some of them by using instruments that they play by breathing and blowing through them. And we wanted to have some real solid, scientific, medically based information to move forward with.
Associate Professor Jerong Hong at Minnesota University is a specialist in computational fluid dynamics. He's fascinated by the behavior of tiny airborne particles.
Those particles are very, very small. They can carry viruses and they can suspend it in the air for a very long period of time. So in this kind of situation, this 6 feet social distancing doesn't really apply. When people playing wind instruments, then put a lot of air into the instruments, so accordingly they're likely to put a lot of aerosol particles. If the person is infected, then they're likely to generate a lot of respiratory droplets that contains the viruses.
The study started with measuring aerosol concentration from different musical instruments in a lab setting. The scientists then came into the concert hall to take readings there.
The natural convection caused by the difference in air temperature and body temperature actually also contributed to the fact that the aerosols did not flow directionally from the instrument. Rather, they were actually transported up, away from the players.
The researchers categorized the instruments into 3 risk categories. The tuba was characterized as low risk because it produced fewer aerosols compared to an average person's exhalation. The bassoon, piccolo, flute, bass clarinet and French horn produce aerosol concentrations in the range of normal breathing. The clarinet, bass trombone and oboe produce concentrations on or just above the range of speaking, and the trumpet produces a significantly higher number of aerosols than all other instruments. This information has allowed the orchestra to plan concerts where the higher risk instruments are in smaller groups and appropriately spaced. From the results, several measures were recommended, including lowering the temperature of the room, increasing the difference between human bodies and the ambient air, which creates a stronger upward thermal plume.
We have used the results of the research to inform how we set up our stages, how we have our musicians interact with each other. I think it has allowed them to feel comfortable performing and to feel that they can still do what they love.
CGTN's Shini Samara reporting. Now, it's the world's oldest international football fixture and one of Euro 2020's most anticipated games. England face Scotland in just over 2 hours here in London. The Scots will hope to upset England's swagger, with thousands of fans having made the long journey, many without tickets for the game. Our correspondent Guy Henderson is somewhere near Wembley Stadium. So, Guy, whereabouts are you exactly, and what's the atmosphere like?
Well, I'll tell you where we are. We're standing just outside Wembley Park underground station. You might be able to see behind me thousands of fans. We're several hours before the game still. Thousands of fans pouring out of that underground station, making their way under the bridge that we're standing on. And I'll just show you around. Here's the atmosphere you see outside Wembley Stadium in the background. real sense of excitement here. As you say, just 3,000 tickets sold to Scotland fans, and yet we're told by reports in Scottish media that up to 20,000 people have made their way south of the border because they are determined to try and make this as little like a home game for England as they possibly can. There have been warnings from, amongst others, the Mayor of London urging people to stay away, to watch this from home. That, I don't think, has been heeded because there is such a historic rivalry between these two teams. Whether that could cause problems further down, further into the evening, obviously we can't tell you that at the moment. There's quite a heavy police presence, but at the moment, I'm seeing Scottish fans and English fans hugging. There's a lot of cheering and singing. High spirits for what's definitely going to be a pretty entertaining fixture.
So a historic rivalry, as you say, but do you think Scotland can really pull off an upset here?
Well, I think it's pretty clear that England are the favourites going into this, but that is not to say that Scotland are without their own world-class players, chief amongst them perhaps Andy Robertson, the Liverpool defender and captain of this Scottish side. This is the first tournament that Scotland have played in since major tournament they've played in since 1996. Add to that the extent of this rivalry between England and Scotland, and there's no doubt that this is going to be a highly pumped-up Scottish side. The England team are definitely the bookies' favourites, as I was saying, and the kind of headache that Gareth Southgate, the English manager, has will be one he's going to welcome, which is there is such depth to this squad, and at the moment you've got a number of key more experienced England players coming back to full fitness after this long and disrupted domestic season. Jordan Henderson, the Liverpool midfielder, Manchester United's Harry Maguire, and yet you then have these young upstarts who have been making a real mark on the international scene. Chief amongst them perhaps Leeds United's Calvin Phillips, who put in a man-of-the-match performance here at Wembley Stadium a few days ago against Croatia. Those are the kind of headaches that Gareth Southgate is going to have to sort of juggle with his selection. So, yeah, they're the favourites, but it's a major international tournament. Scotland are up for it. Who knows what will happen?
OK, Guy Henderson, outside Wembley Stadium, thanks very much indeed.
Well, Guy Henderson may have the journalistic pedigree, but the final word on the big match at Wembley must surely go to football's top dog pundit, the psychic sausage. Yes, he's back, and it's a rather cheesy affair. Dachshund R2-D2 rose to fame during the World Cup 2018. Here he is predicting a winner, choosing between English cheese or Scots porridge, and it's England who'll win it. So a rather rough night for the Scots ahead, but as we all know, anything is plausible. Sorry, that was awful, wasn't it? Awful.
Don't quite know how to follow that.
Awful. Awful.
Awful. Oh dear, appalling.
I'll stop now.
OK, your headlines again. Iran goes to the polls in a controversial election, all but guaranteed to deliver a hard-line president.
Germany's government wants to offload its stake in Lufthansa. The CEO says he'll pay back an $11 billion bailout by September.
And UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson's Conservative Party suffers an embarrassing mid-term by-election loss as he lost his winning touch.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
More on all our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're on smart TV apps such as Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, as well as CGTN.com and the CGTN app.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again on Monday, same time, same place. From all the team here in London, goodbye.
Goodbye.